Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Well, as we speak, there are demonstrators, anti-independence, pro-Spanish demonstrators gathering in Barcelona, and that, of course, follows the scenes we saw on Friday night. We saw a declaration of independence, a universal declaration of independence from Carles Puigdemont, the Catalan president, and that on the day when the Spanish Senate voted to sack the entire Catalan parliament and its president and the region's autonomy, and they're going to move in this week, apparently, and take over. So it is a situation that is worrying, potentially. What happens when police or troops or whatever it is move in to take over government buildings? Are there going to be rings of protesters outside trying to stop them? Will the police, will the civil service take orders from Madrid? No one knows the answers to any of those things. And certainly, the comment that I've been making about this is that this Catalonia situation is Mr. Juncker's worst nightmare. And to my surprise, he rather acknowledged that yesterday when he said that there are some serious cracks showing in the European Union. We don't want them and we don't need them. So I'm going to have a debate this morning with you about whether, given all the things that have happened, given the way the police behaved on the 1st of October, with 900 people reportedly being injured by them as they were stopped from going to vote in what was an illegal referendum because it didn't have the sanction from the national parliament. But do you now feel perhaps just a little bit more sympathy with the Catalan separatists? And that's what I want to discuss this morning. And I'm going to go straight to Catalonia and speak to the National Secretary of the Catalan National Assembly. It's a membership organisation. They've got 80,000 members. They are for the independence of Catalonia and more broadly for Catalan-speaking peoples. Montse Daban is indeed their National Secretary. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Hi, everybody.
Good morning. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I'm keen to know what happens tomorrow, in your opinion. I mean, they've said, Madrid, they've made it clear they're going to take over the civil service. They're going to take over, the chief of police has been sacked. They're going to take over the police force. What happens when they physically come in tomorrow and try and do that, in your opinion?
Okay, there's two scenarios. The first scenario is that the police use the forces as they did on October the 1st. But this is a clear red line expressed already by the President of the European Parliament, the European Union, Mr. Donald Tusk. He said, no crossing this red line. So we really hope that is not going to happen. And then the other thing is that since President Puigdemont is the president of Catalonia because he was elected in a democratic election on 27 September 2015, and there's a parliament that has majority and presented to these elections with this program of independence in 18 months. What the president did is comply with the mandate that they got from the ballots, and then that's why the society, the population, these 2 million people that expresses every time on the street and on the ballots that we want independence, we are ready to protect peacefully, as we always do, democratically, and in the most peaceful way, our institutions and our elected officials.
Well, your point about peaceful protest, and I saw a couple of MEPs saying, look, we are taking the Gandhi approach, that whatever they do to us, we will not respond with violence. And I saw that and thought, wow, that really is very appealing. And yet, I have to put it to you that one of your own senior officials, Jordi Sanchez, is currently in prison. He's been arrested, but he's been arrested on charges that he did use violence and did destroy police vehicles.
Well, this is what the Spanish government affirms, but if you see the videos that have already presented as evidences to the national audience, the High Court, the video showed exactly the opposite, and these are evidences not used. The whole procedure lacks guarantees all around it, and there's many spots with this lacking of guarantees. And most of these charges are based on falses.
Okay, so you deny. You deny that violence was used.
And actually, let me just mention that they are kept as hostages for this process. So they are political prisoners, not imprisoned because of any violent action, but because they are the peaceful leaders of two organizations that promote independence in Catalonia.
Okay, now, you talked about your president, Carles Puigdemont, and you said he is the president of Catalonia, and indeed he says he's still the president of Catalonia, but under the Spanish constitution, he is legally no longer the president of Catalonia. And I'm just thinking to myself, how does a sensible, peaceful conclusion to all of this come? Now, the Rajoy, the Spanish Prime Minister, has announced a set of elections on the 21st of December. Do you recognise those elections as being legitimate?
First, I will answer the three questions actually I detect in your question.
Yeah.
The first is that the constitutional law, the Spanish constitution, has been transgressed by the Spanish government many times. First, because it's the law intended to be applied in Catalonia is intended to be applied by a government that has broken the constitution in terms of its corruption activities, and it's trying to hide everything that has been doing so far in this area by hiding, strengthening the hate towards Catalonia. So first, there's a government breaking its own rules many times. Second, the 155 they're trying to apply goes farther than what is intended in the Constitution. So there's also another breaking of the Constitution in that term. So this is not constitutional, the application of the 155.
Okay, I mean, that's at the heart. That's at the heart of this debate and this argument. But what I'm asking you is, he has put forward these elections. Do you see these as legitimate elections in which you can prove to the world that there is a democratic majority for separating from Spain?
Okay. Yes, I'm going to answer that, but first I wanted to state that your major, it was not true. I was denying the major. But okay, about the elections, we expect the government to decide what to do, and we still haven't heard the leading parties on that regard. What we say is that considered the same as the Spanish government tries to implement them as autonomous, a region within Spain elections, that is not possible at all because we are not anymore a region inside Spain. Maybe another possibility we've seen in the media today is consider that constitutive elections or a substitute for referendum. We expect the leading parties to inform on that regard, but never we would accept as a society autonomous elections anymore.
Right, so you don't accept those elections. Fine. Would you accept if the Spanish government came back and said, OK, we need to settle this once and for all. We give you our permission to hold a full referendum done on a free and fair basis and that both sides accept the result. Would you accept that?
We understand that despite the fact that our parliament has an absolute majority elected by the people, and the parliament had this mandate, we accept that at the eyes of the world, the more affirmations we have on that regard, the better. So we could envisage the possibility of having a referendum, an agreed referendum. But this has to be explained very well to the society because we have already passed that page. We are on another page now. So if we are correctly explained, but only an agreed referendum, not anymore autonomous elections.
No. And how do you view the European Union's involvement in this since the 1st of October?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, I mean, after what happened on the 1st of October, we saw the Deputy President of the European Commission saying that he thought necessary force had been used and that the Spanish police had done the right thing. I just wondered what your attitude towards the European Union was in the wake of those comments.
We understand that one thing is Europe and the European Union, and another thing is the current leaders that can be answering to certain pressures that we know that have been performed by the Spanish government. So we understand that seeing Mr. Dusty is trying to say that all we saw in the world was were fake images. We understand that they may be kind of tricked, but at the end of the day, they have to know that we have 1,000 people injured by the Spanish police, and Europe can no longer admit that. So we expect them to have another attitude towards 7.5 million European citizens that are claiming for attention and a resolution.
OK, listen, I'm going to say thank you very much indeed, Montse Daban, the General Secretary there of the Catalan National Assembly Organisation. Thank you for doing that interview. Well, folks, you can see the positions on this are pretty intransigent. She was pretty much saying that she won't accept the legitimacy of elections that have been called by Rajoy, the Prime Minister of Spain, but that perhaps a final referendum that is agreed by both sides, is seen to be conducted on a free and fair basis, just might, be the solution to what are clearly wholly intransigent positions. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on RBC. The Spanish Senate has voted to remove autonomy from Catalonia, to sack the Parliament, to sack the President and hold fresh elections on December the 21st. But we heard with our first interview of the day with the Catalan National Assembly Organisation, a big campaigning group in the region, that they don't accept that, and they think that actually they still have their autonomy. In fact, they think actually they're now independent because they declared it after a vote in their own assembly on Friday. So clearly deeply intransigent positions. And joining me now for a neutral view on this is Jim Kent, the owner of Barcelona City FM, who's lived in Barcelona for over 2 years and is a previous guest on this show. Jim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
Well, I have to say that my interview, which I don't know whether you heard, with Montse Daban of the Catalan National Assembly, left me thinking that whilst the Catalan separatists may have had a vote in the Parliament with a majority and may have had their president declaring UDI, that somehow they're going to have to do quite a bit more than that to convince the international community.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. This journey has only just started for the nationalists. Today, as you mentioned in your news bulletin, the focus is on a pro-unity demonstration, and
yes.
I've already seen people on the metro system here in their Spanish flags, and some of them even look potentially prepared for trouble, wearing helmets and masks, etc. And it is fair to say that the pro-Spanish side tends to be a coalition of groups, some of which are rather right-wing, of a fascist origin, and come into Barcelona for the occasion. So let's hope that doesn't evolve, but there is the potential for that later on today.
Yes, and I guess on the other side of the argument, Jim, if the police and army move in and try and take over government buildings on Monday, there's also the possibility that Catalan separatists may try and stop them from doing so.
Yes, indeed. We did hear news that the Catalan separatists might try and barricade government buildings. Yeah. Many of the local government ministers intended to go to work as usual, and then the local supporters said, yes, well, we are here to support you and prevent this new installation of a new team coming from Madrid. I should also mention one point here is that some Catalans are also a little critical of some parts of the press, some parts of the international press, including the British press, saying that the British press is swallowing the propaganda being served to it by Madrid. Somebody said to me that if any nation should appreciate when the will of the people is asking to leave a greater trading area, it's the
British. Yeah, no, I understand that. Although that was how the people voted, Jim. I'm afraid the political establishment don't necessarily feel the same way about that referendum result. No, I mean, look, we've seen the European Union, we've seen the British government, we've seen everybody saying they don't recognise the events in Barcelona last Friday, and I do think they have much further to go to convince people. What I'm fascinated by is whether these elections on the 21st of December will effectively be boycotted by the separatists, or whether they will try and use it as an opportunity to show their legitimacy. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I put exactly that question to various Catalans over the last 24 hours, and their initial reaction was, if there's an opportunity to vote, we want to engage with that. We do believe in democracy. We want to express a view. However, we do want to follow the lead of Carlos Puigdemont as well. So if he makes a decision to boycott them, as he may well do, as you heard in your previous interview, if these are just autonomous elections. Effectively, people now are fiercely reacting against the sense of Madrid imposing elections. If these are our actual constitutional elections here, where Catalonia is deciding its own fate, you'll find people will support it far more readily. So if there's any sense of a Madrid imposition, expect people possibly not to engage with the process.
And my firm view is the only way this gets resolved at all, in any way, is that both sides agree, both sides consent, rather than having elections, to having a referendum on this issue, early next year, let's say, and that both sides say they're prepared to accept the result. I mean, am I right in thinking that, or would that of itself maybe not be the end of it?
No, I believe that would be the end of it, and that would be the question you should pose to Mariano Rajoy himself and ask him, why has he not done that? Why won't he give the people of Catalonia a chance to express that view? And the real honest answer is he would worry about losing the vote. But
well, Jim, if he comes to the European Parliament in Strasbourg as a group leader there, I promise you, I will ask him that very question. Jim Kent, owner of Barcelona City FM, previous guest of the show, thank you for coming on. I do strongly suspect that we may well be speaking to him again. So, OK, you've heard just how trapped and intransigent both sides are on this, and I thought it was quite alarming to hear that people coming in on the metro system today with masks, helmets, violence may not be very far away. But given all that's happened over the course of the last month, do you now have more sympathy with the Catalan separatists? And if you do, and think they've been treated very badly, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think Spain actually is right to take back control, that the Catalonians have acted, or their leadership have acted, frankly, illegitimately, in which case you can text to 84850. Maybe you agree with me that surely a referendum is the only possible way forward to solve any of this, in which case, using the hashtag Farage and LBC, you can tweet at LBC, you can watch us on Facebook from here in the London studios and comment there too. And Ernie from Chiswick has called me. Ernie, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Thanks for taking the call. First of all, I disagree with most of your politics, but to be fair, you've never ever written books or said that your DNA is superior to other people of Europe, etc., etc. I'm just trying to enlighten your viewers, your listeners,
Yeah.
But the Catalan nationalists have been for decades, making speeches about their DNA being superior, different to the rest of Spain, etc., etc. So this has fermented a fear amongst the Spanish-speaking population of Catalonia, which on a sunny or cloudy day is about 3 million. So I think you need to take that on board.
Yes.
Whilst there is a Falanges hangover in Madrid, and that's my country of origin. Originally, I'm from born in Gibraltar, raised in Andalusia. Equally, the Catalan bourgeoisie knows exactly what it was stirring. And I think it's very comfortable, you and me, on a Sunday morning, having a chat about Spain, but Spain is not England. And the West is always saying how it regrets getting involved in Iraq and Syria. Now, I'm not comparing Spain with that, but Spain is not England. Spain's democracy is in its nappies. If anything, I think Madrid needs help from Europe to try and resolve this in a different way, because it didn't help Spain in 36 and 39, as you know.
But Ernie,
step back.
But Ernie, you said yourself. You said yourself that you were born in Gibraltar. I mean, Spain is supposed to be a modern democracy, and I get your point that it may not have a long tradition of this, but just look at the way Spain treats Gibraltar on a weekly basis in terms of obstructionism at the border. And Ernie, can you imagine how the rest of the world looks at the police force being used to prevent people from going out and expressing an opinion on Sunday morning and wounding nearly 1,000 people?
If Nigel, if the rest of the world were to study Catalonia's social history the last 20, 30 years, being a Spanish-speaking person in somewhere like Hospitalet de Llobregat, which is a Spanish-speaking area, you encounter suffer racism on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. That's never been reported. If you were a Spain national topman on a different day of the week, you're in big trouble in some parts of Catalonia. And the nationalism that has been spurned on the people by their nationalist leader Jordi Pujol. You can look him up on the internet. He's the godfather of modern day Catalan nationalism. wrote a famous book in the 50s saying that the Andalusian male, which is region of southern Spain, is half-baked and archaic. I've never, and as much as I disagree with your politics, I've never heard you.
No, and nor would I. So, Ernie, what you're saying is there is a strain of this Catalan nationalism that has been around for a long time, that is about racial superiority,
Yes,
and is deeply unpleasant, yeah?
Yeah, and it's never ever mentioned. And I just want to put it, but having said that, I agree with you. It is a bit of a mess. I don't know where we're going to go from here, but I think what is lacking in the news is how Spain should be congratulated for taking the democracy on from Franco. It got a bit of help then. I think we just need one more push-up from everyone.
Well, it's 40 years ago, but Ernie, listen, thank you. Ernie making a point there. He's saying his view from his experience of Spain is that there are elements within Catalan nationalism that are deeply, deeply unpleasant. Equally, on the other side, we heard Jim Kent telling us that there are pro-Spanish fascists, dressed up in paramilitary gear, effectively, coming into town today. Could well be both sides are as bad as each other. Joel is calling from Cambridge. Joel, you're half Catalan, I believe.
Yes, hi Nigel, that's correct. I'm half Catalan, half English.
Yep.
I was born in Barcelona, English mother, Catalan father.
Yep.
Lived there 25 years, but have spent most of my life between the UK and Catalonia.
Mm-hmm.
So my view, obviously, is slightly, I can't answer your direct question of, has things changed my view, but I can tell you that 20 years ago, my grandfather would be talking about independence and how, the Catalan sentiment affected or triggered the civil war with Spain, and how they weren't allowed to even name their children certain names. Or my father himself, when he did the military service, got a gun put to his head for speaking Catalan. So obviously there was a huge repression on the Catalan identity.
Yep.
And but still, even so, once democracy kicked in and the constitution, which we all knew wasn't a perfect constitution, by any means, it wasn't like a modern country constitution, but it's what we call the transition constitution, something that would allow us to move on in a democracy where the fascists and the dictators, or those that were close to dictator Franco, would not be harmed. And while everybody else would, more or less be able to move on. Now, 10 years ago, the sentiment for independence, the support for independence was probably just only around 10%.
It was. That's right.
Not much more than that. And Catalans, through democratic processes, tried to gain more independence, just like they did in the Basque Country. But instead of using violence, they did it in a pacific way. And because of that, they achieved much less.
Yes, and at the moment, I have to say, the previous interview today, when I asked her the question, had her organisation contained some violent people within it, I didn't really get an answer. But overall, Joel, if you were voting, let's say there was a referendum in a few months' time, and given your Catalan heritage, you had a vote in that, which way would you vote now?
Oh, well, I can answer very simply. We are not going to vote because we already consider ourselves an independent country.
All right, fine. Joel, you've taken that view. I thank you very much. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Well, the Catalonians insist they've declared independence and that's it. It's all over. Our previous caller very much echoing that view at the end of the conversation. But actually, truth is, they haven't really, have they? Because if they want the rest of the world to recognise their independence, they're going to have to go a lot further than this. But, on the other hand, Madrid is seen by many to have behaved pretty appallingly, and their friends and supporters in the European Union too. And I'm asking you whether, after the events of the last month, you have more sympathy with the Catalan separatists. But before that, if you want a really good laugh and a proper example of what the Donald would call fake news, just have a little look at this today. Trump, Assange, Bannon, Farage, bound together in an unholy alliance. And this is in today's Observer, and it would appear that I am the bagman. I'm the one running messages and exchanging information between the President of the USA and Julian Assange. I am the bagman. Well, let me just tell you, this is a complete lot of baloney. I have said it before. I will say it again. The reason that I met Julian Assange was because somebody at LBC organised it. And not only that, when I went to meet Julian Assange, I took with me my producer from LBC. You know, if I was running some special mission for the US president, do you really think I'd have taken an LBC presenter with me? Unless, of course, LBC are part of the conspiracy. Perhaps that's what we'll read next Sunday. No, we won't, because they're not. But I just want to say, sometimes people in their own heads conflate the fact that somebody has met somebody who's met somebody, and it must be a grand conspiracy, and it very, very rarely is. Now, back to Catalonia. Lots of you piling in with your comments. How telling that your Catalan guest ducked the question about whether the separatists would accept the results of the new regional elections called for December 21st. The reason is plain and simple. They know they are in a minority and would lose. So much for them being the champions of democracy, says Maura, who's writing in from Chiswick. It is hypocritical of the UK not to recognise Catalonia. The people were brutalised for expressing a democratic view. After all, we did the same with Brexit, says Chris. Come on, Nigel, Catalonia. Let's not get carried away with the romance of revolution. Where is the democratic process? One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, says Dan in Southampton. And Jen says on Facebook, Spain, are frankly, like the EU, they're only interested in the money they can get from Catalonia and not the people. And that is what speaks volumes. Well, in terms of money, Catalonia is 20% of Spain's gross domestic product. So it is, in terms of its production, the most powerful economic part of Spain at the moment in terms of the regions. And it, of course, there are many there that say, look, we are subsidising people in the south who don't work as hard as us. I mean, seriously, they are arguments that are being heard. If it was a separate nation, actually, its GDP would be a lot bigger than over 100 countries in the world. So economically, is it big enough and viable enough to be a state? Yes. My view is this. You know, ever since the ending of the First World War, we have recognised internationally the principle of national self-determination. In fact, so much so that it's written into Chapter 1 of the United Nations Charter and Resolutions. And it says the UN Charter is to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. And I think that the only way we can solve this is for both sides to accept that it has to be a big, free and fair referendum, and the Catalan people decide, just as in many ways David Cameron did that with the people of Scotland. You know, we had a referendum, and frankly now I think it really is a bit of a settled issue. Albeit the one big difference is that the Scottish national position from their party was that they would be fully part of the European Union if they left the United Kingdom. Well, what's becoming pretty clear in Catalonia is there is against the European Union the leaders of these movements as they are against the leadership from Madrid. So do I have more sympathy personally for the Catalan cause than I did a month ago? Actually, the answer to that is yes, I do. I think the way the international community have ganged up and tried to crush them, I think it's absolutely monstrous. I think Frans Timmermans' comments, and don't forget he's Juncker's number 2 in the European Commission, where he basically said, look, the rule of law had to be applied, necessary force was used. I thought it was a monstrous comment. And a comment made by a European Union who, as Juncker himself has said, the cracks are beginning to show. And Catalonia breaking away would frankly make Brexit look like a Sunday afternoon picnic. John from Formby is calling me. Good morning, John.
Yes, good morning.
So do we feel more sympathy now for the Catalan separatists than we did a month ago?
Yes, absolutely. There's 2 points I'd like to make. The first one is a general one. That there seem to be winds of change throughout Europe. There is fragmentation. We've seen Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia go. Mm-hmm. And there's talk in Belgium of a split between the Dutch speakers and the Walloons. And, of course, in this country we've got the antics of the bonny wee sturgeon and the slippery salmon. So this seems to run counter to the EU's project of a unified Europe. It all seems to be breaking up.
One of the odd things, John, about your point is that for at least 25 years, one of the things the European Union tried to do was to have a very strong regional policy, to encourage regionalism, because I genuinely think they believed if people felt as regions they had a big say in the European Union, it would actually detach them from their sense of national belonging. But now it appears with Catalonia, it's started to go back the other way.
Yes, well, that seems to be a classic divide and rule tactic.
Yes, exactly.
But the second point I would make is that I won't be convinced about Catalonian independence until I'm convinced that the majority of Catalans want it. And therefore I agree with you that there has to be a referendum, and that the handling of the affair by the Spanish government has been repressive, and it brings back memories of Hitler's Anschluss with Austria. Same sort of tactics.
Well, there are all sorts of unpleasant historical analogies we could use with what apparently is going to happen in Barcelona and elsewhere over the course of the next couple of days. John from Formby, I thank you. And they held their referendum, their illegal referendum under Spanish national law, and they got 92% to vote for independence, for separation, but on a 43% turnout. Imagine if this was the referendum that mattered and the turnout was 85%. Who knows? I can't predict which way this would go. All I've felt ever since October the 1st is that a lot of fair-minded people who might be in the middle would look at the way that the Spain particularly had behaved and think, you know what, the hell with you, we'll go on our own. I suspect that if the Spanish had not behaved, the national Spanish government had not behaved the way they did on the 1st of October, I'm not sure, frankly, we'd even be having this discussion, because I think internationally then, the separatists would be seen to be making an argument from a minority point of view without any legitimacy. It is the fact that they can now say, we are the wounded party, that I think has played into their hands. Do we feel more sympathy for the Catalan cause over what's happened in the course of the last month? Rosario on Facebook doesn't, and says the law is the law. If you defy the law, you know what happens, and that's what's gone on in Catalonia. Well, yes, but there is this thing called the UN and the principle of national self-determination. Surely people's voice ought to be heard. Barry says on Facebook, what happens if Catalonia has a referendum and votes to be independent? Will it be accepted? Well, Barry, that's the point, isn't it? That Rajoy, the Prime Minister of Spain, needs to say that we will have this referendum and we will accept the result. And in that case, yes, they would be independent. But Barry, it's by no means certain that those who want separation, those who want independence would win. It is by no means certain. But I cannot see how you could end this argument unless you go down that route. Helen says, I agree that a referendum should be allowed. Kerry says the EU will mobilise an army of Remainers to demonstrate Spanish unity in Barcelona. They might, Kerry, but that could go the other way, it seems to me. Martin is calling me from Balham. Good morning, Martin. What's your view?
Hey, Nigel, I was a Remainer. I'd never found myself saying this, but I totally agree with you on 2 points. First of all, you're completely free to meet whoever you want, if that's the President of the United States or Julian Assange. You're a free citizen.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you. Very good. Okay.
My second point is that the Catalan situation, although we're on other sides of the EU conundrum, I think the EU is in a real pickle here. I say that because from Tusk's perspective, he can't support Spain breaking up, because if he lets Spain break up, the Belgians are going to follow, the Italians are going to follow. They had regional referendums last week, as you know, for more regional autonomy. And there's a lot of groundswell pressure in Europe for regional identity. So the EU's damned if it does, damned if it doesn't.
Well, Martin, there's one slight difference. That when the Scottish referendum was taking place, what was clear to me in the European Parliament is they all wanted Scotland to vote to leave the United Kingdom because Alex Salmond was so fanatically pro being part of the European Union and for years had supported joining the euro currency. The difference here, Martin, fragmentation is tougher to manage, but the real difference here is that there's a strong strain within the Catalan independence movement that is totally opposed to the European Union. So in a way, it poses a mortal threat, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, what's going to happen if there's riots on the streets of Barcelona again and people get hurt? and then we have a civil war in Europe. What's the EU going to do then?
Well, I don't know, Martin, but I tell you what I think about the European Union, and OK, we're at this from different angles, but when it comes to anything the Polish government does, they intervene and comment and criticise. Anything the Hungarian government does, they intervene, comment and criticise. Anything the British government does, they don't like over the years. They intervene, comment, take us to court and all the rest of it. And yet here is a so-called modern-day democracy injuring nearly 1,000 people. They said nothing, and I challenged Juncker directly on this in the European Parliament. I said, you haven't said a dicky bird on this. And then when they do say something, they say necessary force was used. And they appear, Martin, to me, as a leaver, but they appear to me to put European integration as a process above any sense of morally what is right or wrong.
As a Remainer, I would say Europe is about liberties, and that's why I think they should have condemned the state action.
Yeah.
Spain.
Is it possible, Martin, that the European Union is a less pleasant place than you thought it was during the referendum?
Well, Nigel, I believe sharing is caring, and I believe in reform of the EU. I think we've got a bad political leadership in the centre, which needs to be more listening to the concerns of voters in Europe and needs to change. But for me, that wasn't a reason to leave. But
no, sure. OK, but Martin, overall, do you feel more sympathy with the Catalans now than you did a month ago?
Yes.
Splendid. Thank you very much indeed. Bruce is calling from Henley. Bruce, good morning.
Very good morning to you. I had a little moment when I've just realised what the M25 is, and I'd like to get your feelings on this, Nigel.
Yep.
The M25 is in fact a cutting guide, how we can remove London and Greater London from the rest of the UK, get a few English-built tugs, drag us to a slightly warmer climate, maybe next to Barcelona. We can link up together as two great industrial powerhouses, financial powerhouses, and start doing our own trade deals, purely on the basis that, as we all know, economically, if you're further away from doing trade, it costs you more to do it. So, I know it's a great idea doing business with New Zealand. However, it takes a little bit longer for goods to get here and so on. So us Londoners, you're lovely geezer, Nigel, but we kind of wanted to stay there. So I'm just trying to find a happy medium between our two outlooks.
Difference is that whilst London may have different social attitudes to areas just 50 miles beyond it, and whilst London may have considerably higher incomes than those that live outside of it, I've never heard a serious argument that says that London should declare UDI or the rest of the country should ditch London. I think pretty much in England we're a pretty united nation, aren't we?
No, I'm not suggesting UK. I suggest us Londoners we move away.
No. So you want London to declare UDI, yeah?
We don't have the same demographic as the rest of the UK. We don't have the same segregation that you see and the difference of attitudes because we're all layered upon each other and got on with life and business is open 24/7.
But ultimately, Bruce, if you ask people in Bolton or Sheffield, just as you ask them in London, what is their identity? They will say English-British, won't they?
I totally agree with you, but they've also been fed a load of codswallop by individuals in the Brexit that then just did the off afterwards when he went through the referendum. Not pointing any fingers, Nigel.
Who did the off, Bruce? Bruce, some of you guys out there, hang on to these myths. Michael Gove is currently running agriculture and fisheries, albeit with a little local difficulty to sort out after yesterday. Boris Johnson is the foreign secretary, and I'm still leading a group in the European Parliament. None of us did the off, but I thank you for your call. John is calling from Germany. Is it Gütersloh? Is that how I pronounce it, John?
It's Gütersloh.
OK, well, I got that wrong. But never mind. Good morning to you.
Good morning. The Catalan independence movement are doomed. They've gone off showboating any sympathy anybody might have had. They appeal to their own support base, nobody else. They got a platform in that Catalan parliament and have used it to claim credibility, gone off organising this referendum.
Yep.
There's going to be another election. Spain has moved in. The vast majority of people will turn up for that election in December, and they will be crushed and removed from that parliament. That's what's going to happen here. I appreciate you're quite right. If they had been able to agree a mutually agreed independence referendum with Spain, that every party could have agreed. But it's gone beyond that now, Nigel.
Do you think, John, that these elections will solve the problem then?
It will solve the problem technically in short term. There'll no doubt be rumblings from the Catalans, from the Catalan independence movement thereafter, but really they put the national government into a corner with it. They did handle it badly, the national government, which hasn't helped the situation. But
I don't doubt, John, for a minute, that the Catalans were very provocative in holding that referendum, as they've been provocative in declaring UDI. I don't doubt that. But all the while, they are seen to be peaceful and decent. And I have to be honest, looking at those images of people in the square in Barcelona on Friday night, they did appear to be decent and reasonable. All the while they maintain the higher moral side of the argument, the more sympathy, I think, ordinary folk will have for them. But you may well be right, John. And other people have made this point, that it may well be that actually Puigdemont, claiming he has a majority is actually false. I have more sympathy for them than I had a month ago, but I certainly wouldn't recognise them as an independent state yet. They haven't proved their legitimacy. So I agree with that point, John, completely, and I thank you for your call. Can we stop speaking about Catalans and say the independents? They are only a part of the population. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We must be very careful about that. There are, people living in Catalonia strongly on both sides of the argument. Would Spain want to hang on to Catalonia if they were poor? Unlike Scotland, they are not subsidised by Madrid, says Julia. Actually, yes, they would. They fear the integrity of Spain. They fear it breaking up. And my last caller on this subject this morning is Rudy, who's calling from Exeter. Good morning.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. My point is this, right? Whether you agree with them or not, they're supposed to be in a democratic union, which obviously we know they're not. So they should have the right to have their say in their vote. And if they're so sure that the majority of the people would stay to be part of Spain, then why are they frightened of having a referendum? And why were they actually stopping the ballot boxes on the previous time back in October?
Rudy, I think you make a perfectly fair point, a perfectly fair point. And Rudy, the point is that the United Nations Charter and resolutions make it clear that people are entitled to national self-determination, and it appears that Spain wants to stop them from doing that. And finally, Rudy, just very quickly, if you were Catalan now, which way would you vote?
I'd vote to leave, because the thing is this, right? What people are not asking, with all these politicians that want to remain, and it's the same in the UK, what's in it for them? Point two, if being a part of the EU is so fantastic, why are most of the countries on their knees, and why do they all want to come to Britain?
Well, there you go, Rudy from Exeter, I thank you. That's the end of that conversation. Looking ahead, a Conservative Member of Parliament has written to all the UK universities demanding a list of professors who are teaching students about Brexit, and there's been a big backlash from the academics. Is it right for this MP to question how Brexit is being taught? If you think yes, Brexit should be taught without any prejudice, call me on 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think it's right that teachers and lecturers give their own opinions on Brexit, in which case text to 84850. If you're a student, tweet me using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC. Tell us how you're being taught, and of course you can watch the show live by going to LBC's Facebook page and commenting there too. So a Conservative Member of Parliament, Chris Heaton-Harris, Tory MP, was for 10 years an MEP, so someone that I know quite well, in the campaign, a staunch Brexiteer. He's a junior government whip, and he wrote to all the universities in the country a letter asking for a list of professors and asking for the syllabus that is being taught to people in our universities about Brexit. One guesses that he did it because he was concerned that maybe Brexit was being presented at universities in a bad light, and there's certainly plenty of rumour and gossip about that. But was he right? Was it a fair thing for him to do, to write this letter? Or was it, as the huge response that's come from the universities, was it actually McCarthyism? Was it him trying to single out individual lecturers and professors whose view of the world he didn't like in a campaign to have them removed? Was he guilty, perhaps ultimately, of censorship? And I wonder, are you happy with the way the universities are teaching Brexit, what their attitude towards Brexit is? Do you think they're fair and they're balanced? Or was Chris Heaton-Harris's suspicion right? I don't know. I want to hear from you, and I particularly want to hear from you if you're at university or you've recently been at university. You know, is this impression that people like me have that the universities are hugely biased in favour of Remain? Am I right about that? And I say it because 21 vice-chancellors of our biggest universities came out very early in the Brexit campaign without consulting their boards to say their universities were in favour of Remain. Is there a bias within these universities? Is Mr. Heaton-Harris right, or was he actually trying to intimidate university lecturers? Let me know what you think by calling me on 0345 6060 973. Text your opinions to 84850, and you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. You can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Well, somebody with a strong opinion of what Chris Heaton-Harris did earlier this week is Tom Brake, Member of Parliament for Carshalton and Wallington, and the Liberal Democrat Brexit spokesman. Tom, good morning to you.
Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning. Now, you had some reservations about Mr. Heaton-Harris's behaviour here.
Yes, I mean, first of all, it's not clear whether his intention was to intimidate or not, but certainly the perception from the universities was that that was his intention. One other aspect of this, which I think we need to get to the bottom of, is whether this was, in fact, a research project, according to one of the ministers, Joe Johnson, that Mr. Heaton-Harris was carrying out for the purposes of a book that he is writing. Mm-hmm. And if that is the case, then I'm afraid Mr. Heaton-Harris, A, should have made that obvious in his letter, and B, should not have been using House Commons paper for that purpose.
Well, certainly, Tom, if he was going to write a book and sell it for money, yeah, you're quite right, that would have been wrong. So, but research can be for all sorts of reasons, can't it? It can be for him to help to form his own political opinions. I think Mr. Heaton-Harris, he's a strong Brexiteer. He did it, Tom, didn't he? Because, and this is me guessing, if he wants to come on the show and tell me he can, but he did it because he suspects that Brexit is being taught in a very, very negative light at our universities right now.
Well, he may suspect that. I'm not sure that he has any evidence to that effect. And I think the difficulty with this is that if, for instance, we had a report in the British press of a senior Turkish politician writing to Turkish academics saying, please set out for me what you are teaching students in relation to certain aspects of Turkish politics, we, I think, rightly would have felt, well, that was an attempt by a senior Turkish minister to put pressure on academics to toe the line. I guess the real issue, of course, is whether, in fact, there is a line that one has to toe in relation to Brexit, or whether academics are simply saying, this is the understanding of what is going to happen. And one of the difficulties that Mr. Heaton-Harris has, of course, is that the 50-plus sectoral reports that the government have commissioned, which we as taxpayers have paid for, that are looking at the impact of Brexit in over 50 sectors, the government are not willing to release that. So it's actually difficult for certainly the public to know what the impact of Brexit is, because the government is not willing to share with us. Yeah,
that's a slightly separate argument, though, isn't it? I mean, the real question here is, Tom, do you feel that our universities, in the run-up to the referendum and since, have behaved even-handedly and fairly?
Well, that depends on whether you think there is an even-handed approach to something as crucial as the impact of Brexit. Equally, is there an even-handed approach? Should one?
Yes, of course, Tom. The answer is, of course, there is.
Change?
Of course, there is. I think Brexit's a liberation, the greatest thing we've done for centuries. You think it's a disaster, but they're two opinions. Yeah. But they're two opinions, aren't they? Surely the job of any academic institution is to encourage their students to see both sides of that argument, and through their own critical thought process to make up their own minds.
Well, yes, but equally in relation to something like Brexit, I know clearly you're a strong Brexiteer,
sure.
But in fact the evidence of economists, the evidence, what businesses were worried about was that there would be a very significant impact on
I tell you what, Tom. I tell you what.
There was only a minority of businesses, a very small minority.
Tom, I could take you. I could take you this week. I could take you this week to meet some of the biggest, most successful entrepreneurs this country has produced, in the last several hundred years, who would tell you they think Brexit is a fantastic global opportunity for the country. But that isn't the point, is it? Surely the point about university is that the universities should not take political sides on matters like this.
Well, you're interpreting a position, and frankly, we don't know what the position they're adopting is in any sort of true sense, but you're assuming that they have to give a balanced economic position on these are the advantages of Brexit, these are the disadvantages of Brexit, but if the balance of opinion is in fact very strongly, for instance, in favour of there being a very negative impact of Brexit, then surely they are entitled to represent that. Yes, of course, they can flag up that there are people like you who think it will deliver for the country, but the majority of people in the CBI, for instance, felt that...
Oh, yeah. The CBI wanted us to join. But that is a separate argument. I mean, Tom, so you think, according to your view of this and what economists or the CBI think, do you think it was absolutely fine and reasonable for 21 vice-chancellors of those universities in the referendum to stand up and say, we're advocating Remain?
They have to, I guess, look at the impact on them as a university, and it's very clear that the university sector, particularly in terms of science and research funding, has in fact been a net beneficiary of our membership of the European Union, so I'm sure they're reflecting that, and of course they're also reflecting on the fact that universities are part of often an EU-wide, yes, sometimes with Americans as well, but principally EU-wide networks who deliver on a range of projects. So I'm sure that is what they were looking at in terms of
money.
If it's going to be good for us or not.
Money, that's what they were looking at. Tom, wasn't it? Money.
They were looking at research, they were looking at exchange, they were looking at the benefits that they got as universities from having a close working relationship with the EU partners, which is now going to be damaged, I'm afraid, as a result of Brexit.
And what should Mr Heaton-Harris do now, in your view?
Well, Mr Heaton-Harris, he's obviously put that request out there. It hasn't been treated very favourably with the universities. I think at this point he needs to desist and stop pursuing an agenda which, even if it isn't his intention, can clearly be perceived as an attempt to put pressure on the universities to toe whatever he thinks is the right line.
OK. Tom Brake, thank you ever so much indeed for that opinion. Well, Tom and I couldn't be further apart on this. He thinks that because the CBI and economists during the campaign and since think it's going to be a disaster, that it's perfectly reasonable for the universities to teach in that way. I think it's an outrage. I don't think universities should take positions on this. I think they did it during the referendum. Do you know why? Do you know Oxford University, Oxford and Cambridge between them, get 100 million quid a year from the European Union? That effectively what the EU has done through its funding and research programmes is something I'm not even sure that totalitarian regimes are as successful at taking over the tertiary sector of education in the way that the European Union have. And I think it is unbelievable that 21 vice-chancellors during the course of that referendum campaign urged a Remain vote. I don't think we're teaching our young people genuine critical thinking. I'm worried about it, and I see example after example of young people saying to me, actually, they dare not admit to their peer group that they are pro-Brexit or that they voted Brexit, that even if they're writing in their essays, they fear they might be marked down if they're in favour of Brexit. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I've got carried away with this. Tell me, actually, it's all fine and dandy and that Tom Brake's opinion is right, that it's OK to teach a slightly negative view of Brexit because the CBI think that's the case. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Chris Heaton-Harris, Member of Parliament, Junior Whip, writes to the universities and says, please tell me who's teaching Brexit and what the syllabus is. Are the young people there being given a fair and balanced view? And he's met with outrage. He's behaving like a McCarthyite, a censor. Thou doth protest too much, I thought, very, very quickly. And I just interviewed Tom Brake, who's the Liberal Democrat Member of Parliament for Carshalton and Wallington, and he's their Brexit spokesman, and he genuinely believes that because the CBI and other economists and businesses say Brexit's a negative, that is what the universities should be teaching. And I passionately disagree with that. I think the universities should be absolutely neutral. Tough, though, when they're getting all this money, isn't it, really? I wonder what Catherine in Ealing makes of this debate. Good morning, Catherine.
Oh, hello, Nigel. Yes, well, there's an article in the Sunday Telegraph today on this very issue.
There is.
And students are saying exactly what you're saying, that they can't express their views because they feel they're going to get marked down in their essays if they come out in favour of Brexit or make arguments in favour of Brexit. And they feel obliged to, toe the line and be pro-Remain when they're not really like. That isn't their real views. And
yes.
That, my mind, is not university education.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Catherine. I couldn't agree more. Surely critical thinking is that young people are exposed to both sides of an argument and make their own minds up.
Yes, that's what the university should be doing. They should be saying, OK, look, we get all this funding from the EU for our research and put that on the one side. On the other hand, they should say, in the 1970 referendum, people voted to be in the common market. They didn't vote to be in the European Union. They were given assurances then that there were no plans for further economic or political union.
Do you feel, Catherine, like me, that something has gone drastically wrong with our universities?
Oh, definitely. I think it's basically people are buying a degree now. They're paying £9,000, or their parents are. They're buying that degree, and I think that I went to university a long time ago, but it wasn't like that then. It was genuine. You got a really good education. You were able to express yourself, and freedom of speech, freedom of thought was the thing most valued when I was there, certainly.
And so it still should be. Catherine, I thank you very much. It's even worse than Catherine says, because it isn't just large sums of money that are going into research. There are large sums of money actually directly going into, from the European Union, what students are taught. Jean Monnet, for those who don't know, was a French super bureaucrat who was the father of the modern-day European Union. We now have scattered throughout British universities Jean Monnet chairs, Jean Monnet modules, Jean Monnet centres of excellence, where the European Union pays professors to teach people about the benefits of integration and the benefits of the European Union. And in 2014 and 15, in this country alone, over £1 million was spent paying for those departments to teach people one side of the coin. And that's outrageous. Universities should not take money from political organisations to teach their own ideology. And that is the trap that further education in this country has fallen into, and it needs to end, and it needs to end quickly. And I'm amazed that no one talks about this. I've come up against, on interviews, professors that have put on TV shows, radio programmes against me, even big debates against me. And when I challenge them, and I ask them, are you a Jean Monnet professor? Well, they sort of mumble and stumble a little bit, and then they admit that they are, and that should not exist within our system. And one of the benefits of Brexit, perhaps, folks, is we can sack all of these people, we can fund the universities ourselves, perhaps put a watchdog in place to make sure they teach everything impartially and fairly, because they're not doing it now. Matthew is calling from Wandsworth. Matthew, hello, good morning.
Morning, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Pleasure to speak to you. Now, are you a student?
I am, yeah.
So don't tell me where, because that wouldn't be fair. But, I mean, I've been very critical this morning of the fact that I don't think critical analysis is happening properly in our universities. Tell me I'm wrong.
I'm afraid you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. I'm not studying politics or anything that should really be associated with politics at all.
Right.
But even then, these lectures will find a way to slip in gags about Brexit, or, you have an Italian lecturer say, after 15 years in this country, I'm being told I've got to go home. It's absolutely ridiculous. The general attitude here is so anti-Brexit but you can't get a word in edgeways.
And what if you, Matthew, in the coffee room or canteen, were to say that you were pro-Brexit? How would you be treated by your fellow students?
Well, to be fair, I'm at a university which is generally slightly more conservative than most. But even here, it's still a sort of fringe attitude to hold. And, heaven forbid you support Trump as well. Then you're sort of the arch nemesis.
Yeah, I know. What position that puts me in, Matthew. But, so it's. I wonder, is it the universities that have encouraged large numbers of our young people to think this way? Or would large numbers of our young people think this way anyway?
Frankly, I think they would be thinking this way before they got it, but it's the fact that they're never challenged and they're told this is the view you should have, and they're encouraged. They joke about it, they go along with it, and they've no reason to ever think otherwise because they don't ever get told that you should make your own mind up.
Make your own mind up. Matthew, I thank you very much for that call. David Lawson sends in by text, and I couldn't agree more with this. Universities should be teaching how to think, not what to think. David, that sums it up, to me, absolutely beautifully. I'm going to Connor, who's calling from Glasgow. Connor, good morning.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks for having me. I'm just calling to say this MP calling at the universities, I do think it is an attack on academia in the sense that you are, if you get into university, you are clearly an intelligent person who is thoughtful and can challenge an opinion. When you're in university, you're there to challenge the opinions. If a lecturer has an opinion, you are able to challenge that. You can go off and research in a library and think for yourself. University is there to make you a more intelligent and more thoughtful person, regardless of what subject you're doing.
Well, that's certainly true.
You're not supposed to take things at face value.
That's certainly true, Connor. But what, Connor, if every single lecturer you've got has the same point of view? It's a little bit trickier then, isn't it?
You're still able to, you're still able to go out. As I say, you're not supposed to take it at face value. You're able to go out and look at all this stuff yourself. And there's a plethora of media that you can go and look at that has differing opinions, and you can make up to yourself what suits you the best. But I think this MP going there, it's almost like a witch hunt is how one of my other friends described it to me.
Do you think, Connor, on the subject of the European Union and Brexit, do you think our universities take an even-handed approach?
Thinking about it terms financially, probably not at all, because I do a science subject at university.
Yeah.
So our department is very much heavily handed with, EU grants, as well as many other, subjects within academia. English, maths, science, arts, they're all helped by the EU. And in that terms, I'd say, they're maybe not as balanced as they could be. But in terms of lectures that you actually see day to day and the institution itself, I feel should be neutral. But people inside can have their opinion and they can't talk about it. University is a place to talk about things.
Well, it ought to be, but surely, Connor, he who pays the piper, calls the tune to a very large extent. I mean, the extent to which these departments are funded by the European Union actually makes it rather difficult to speak out against them. They even accept Jean Monnet chairs in universities.
Well, again, he's a big part. He's a big part of the EU, as you were saying. He was one of the founding, people that, for example, I've got a friend that studies EU law. She's learning about him right now. You can't exactly ignore him in that sense.
No, you can't ignore him, but you should.
In the fact that he founded it, but then again, you can't just ignore him for what benefits it may or may not have had. And even though they may be teaching the benefits, I would like to think they are teaching the disadvantages as well. Because, as you say, university is a place for free thinking.
It's a place for free,
and they should be.
No, they should be. They should be. But Connor, you do agree with me that at the moment they're not teaching things in an even-handed way.
Well, I can't exactly say that because I've not witnessed it throughout an entire country's worth of universities.
Okay, all right. No, Connor, thank you. I know. I was listening to the referendum to, our science faculties couldn't exist at our universities without EU funding. That is where future science and development will come from. How on earth Newton and Darwin managed before the European Union is beyond me. I'm going to ask Scott from Wigan what he thinks about the state of our universities. Are they fair? Are they balanced? Are they even on the subject of Brexit?
Hi, Nigel. Am I on?
You are. Good morning.
Hi, Nigel, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I just want to give my own personal experience. I was in university when the referendum was taking place, and what I found is that a lot of the Remainers were very loud, very kind of boisterous about their actual opinion. And the Leavers, I mean, my group of friends, I couldn't really tell who wants to leave and who wants to remain until you kind of go to the pub and you have a proper conversation about it. And you find that the Leavers are very quiet and they don't really like to say, you know, whether their opinion on leaving, because they're scared about being bullied by the left, because they just don't want to be kind of slated for it. That's what I found. But on university lecturers as well, I remember 3 distinct lecturers kind of like preaching to us on the fact that we need to vote Remain, and that's the reason I called up today, just to kind of say that that is valid.
Scott,
the point that you were making.
Scott, you have described a culture, and you have described an environment, and you have described teaching, and you've confirmed all of my very worst fears. And I thank you for coming on LBC and for saying that. Well, that's Scott telling you his experiences during the referendum at a British university. I'm not in the least surprised. In fact, for the number of people that have been in contact with me on this subject, I'm pretty convinced Scott is right. But your job is to call 0345 6060 973 and to tell me I'm talking baloney. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. I want to thank Chris Heaton-Harris, the Conservative MP, for getting a debate going on universities. Are they teaching Brexit fairly? And I think it's a great debate for us to have, not just today on this programme, but more generally within this country. Are we still teaching critical thinking? Are we teaching young people there are two sides of an argument and make your own mind up? Or is Tom Brake, the Lib Dem Member of Parliament and Brexit spokesman for the Lib Dems, is he right that actually we should be teaching people that Brexit's negative because the CBI and so many economists think that it is? I'm completely opposed to that. I also believe there's a lot of bias, real political bias, in universities. Jane from Essex says, Nigel, why do you discriminate against anyone with an education that is academic or inquisitive? Do you not want people to discuss facts in an intelligent way? Yes, Jane, I do. Let me give you some of my experiences of British universities as leader of UKIP, a legitimate, lawful political party that won the European elections in 2014 and got 4 million votes in the general election in 2015. These were my experiences. With the University of East Anglia, we found that an senior elected UKIP official was banned from speaking on campus because students had said they felt intimidated and degraded for the presence of UKIP there. It was very clear that at Derby there was a no-platform policy for UKIP. That happened in November 2012, and it got worse than that. In fact, the university themselves said at Derby that students had a right to feel safe while studying on campus. Nottingham Trent University students were banned from starting a UKIP society. At Brighton Pavilion, the UKIP candidate was pelted. Well, maybe that's fair enough. And perhaps worst of all, and this is not so much at the universities, it's perhaps talking about students themselves and how they're organising and mobilising, that the National Union of Students voted in 2014. They announced their opposition to UKIP as a party, but would not condemn ISIS. Begin to ask yourself, if the National Union of Students have got into that situation, what on earth is going on? So I'm not saying it's just the universities. For some reason, youngsters in this country have a very negative view of Brexit, a very negative view, particularly of UKIP, whilst across the whole of the rest of the continent, every single Sunday, whether it's the Czech Republic or the Austrian elections, we see vast swathes of young people voting for protest parties of the left, the centre and the right. Aaron is calling me from Glastonbury. Aaron, good morning.
Hello, Nigel.
What is your experience of university bias or otherwise?
Well, this is what I kind of wanted to say, because I think it's very interesting. I think the study that's been going on that you've been talking about is a very interesting test of Brexit in the UK. But I think, if I'm honest, it's when you get to university, people are already ready to think critically. They're already encouraged to kind of oppose opinions. I think really where the problem is lying, I think maybe part of the reason why so many young people in the UK are against Brexit is because of secondary schools. And I think that's maybe where we maybe wanting to look more so than universities, because I think It's from my experiences. I've been in classrooms full of 15, 16-year-olds where we've literally been told that Brexit is unthinkable, and obviously I'm 19 now, so this will be years before the referendum. That even a referendum on Brexit would have been completely unthinkable, and a Brexit vote would just be completely unimaginable and completely off the cards. So I think, if I'm honest, universities. I'm not saying there isn't bias at universities. And I'm not saying that if there is, it's unimportant. But secondary. I mean, I wanted to kind of ask you as well. Do you really think that university students are that impressionable to adopt the opinions of their lecturers, or do you think?
No, I think, and we had Connor on the phone from Glasgow earlier saying, look, young people are more than capable of challenging what a lecturer or professor says to them, and that's true. But if every single lecturer says one way, and if the whole atmosphere of the place is one way, it starts to be. And if you're abused for daring to question it, then it becomes more difficult. And I think your telephone call is very interesting, because I think, and I've said this already on this programme, but I think by the time people get to university, many of them are of this mindset already.
Absolutely.
And what university does, frankly, is to confirm that. I can give you, Aaron, an example of a young man. He was 15, he was nearly 16, and his father was called at the workplace and called into school because his son was in trouble. The police had turned up, and this was a school just outside Southampton, and I'm talking about 18 months ago. The police had been called, and so the father, and I've subsequently met the student and the father was called in thinking, crikey, what on earth? What has my son done that the police have been called? And so he turned up to be told that his son had been looking during the lunch hour in the school computer room, sort of adjunct to the library, looking at inappropriate material online. So, again, the father thinks, gosh, is he supporting ISIS? Is he involved in some criminal network? No. The son had been looking at UKIP's website during his lunch hour, and some of the attached comment streams that had gone with that, and for that, just 2.5 years ago, the police were called. So I think, and I think so, Aaron. I think you're right. I think you're onto something. I do know that EU propaganda gets pumped out through even as early as primary school, where packs have been going to the schools over the last few years, saying things like there used to be horrible world wars in Europe, but now we've got the European Union, this can never happen again. So, Aaron, I thank you for your call, and I think that's a very important part of this whole jigsaw. Martin is calling from Epsom. Martin, good morning. What's your experience?
Good morning, Nigel. First of all, I have to point out I voted Remain, but I have absolutely no love for the NUS either. So that's aside. During the referendum, students at my university organised a big debate with our local MP, with the candidates from all different parties. And the university, this became so popular, the university didn't have the security facilities that could take on the amount of people that wanted to be there and be at the debate. So we insisted that the UKIP candidate, who obviously didn't win any kind of general election, but that he came along and made the point for Brexit. Obviously, being a university area, we voted overwhelmingly Remain. But still, the UKIP candidate, we insisted that they come along, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students came along. It was a big thing. We held it in the local cathedral. Rented that out. The head of the debating union at my university paid for it out of his own pocket.
Fantastic.
To get the cathedral. And unfortunately, I have to totally disagree with you. The atmosphere of debate, at least at my university, was extremely healthy. People looked at both sides of the argument. This isn't school. University are given the fact that independent study, it's not, 2 + 2 is 4. It's, here's 2 and here's 2, and let's see if you can, put it together and make 4.
Well, Martin, that's a great story. It's a great story, and the fact that the tutor paid out of his own pocket for the cathedral. You've just told me a fantastic story. That is exactly how argument and debate within schools and universities, I'm going to add schools in after that last phone call, that's exactly how it should work. So I'm very happy to hear your phone call, but Martin, I'm hearing many people from other universities where UKIP candidates are being banned from speaking. That can't be right, can it?
Personally, I do take some issue with that. I also think that they're under no kind of legal obligation to do that. I think that, I deeply, deeply, deeply disagree with people like yourself. But I think the only way we're ever going to get rid of that sort of mindset is by challenging it and openly debating and fairly debating that and making the case for liberal politics. But what specifically with the newspaper article about Chris Heaton-Harris, well, who else had a list of names right? That was Joseph Stalin. There is an echo of that. No way am I comparing.
Well, I think Stalin would be very proud of Jean Monnet chairs in universities funded by the European Union. I mean, would you support the principle of Jean Monnet chairs, Martin?
I studied German at university, right? So it was heavily European politics all over. All of my lecturers were obviously fairly left-wing, especially economically.
Why, obviously?
And politically. That's a very good question.
But it is a good question. I'm asking whether, what I'm asking, Martin, is whether our young people, through school and university, are being given an even-handed assessment of the way the world is, encouraged to see both points of view, and then told, through critical thought, you make your own mind up. And you just said to me, obviously, most of them were left-wing. There's something wrong with that, isn't there?
I think statistically, if you were to come up with some sort of visual graph, as the academic qualifications go up, so bachelor, GCSEs, A-levels, bachelors, PhDs, professorships, I think as those go up, you would probably see a trend of leaning further to the left. Now, but I was fully capable of challenging my lecturer whenever he said something like. Something pro-Corbyn, for example, and I'm absolutely not. And there was an absolute atmosphere of fair debate there because, just because someone says, this is wrong and that's wrong, I'm saying, yes, it is wrong, but it can be fixed in other ways.
And challenged.
There is absolutely no silencing. And, I would never vote for Corbyn and I would never vote for Theresa May. But
Martin, you're very good at making your own mind up. You've also had the benefit of a university education where Brexit clearly was handled correctly as an issue. There are many who don't share that experience. I fear, that's my view. Do our schools and universities teach our younger people about Brexit in a fair, even and balanced way? Or is it, as Tom Brake, Lib Dem MP, suggested earlier on in this hour, perfectly reasonable to teach a negative view of Brexit because the CBI and so many economists think it could be a bad thing? And before I get there, it's Sunday, so a sort of slight religious spot for a moment, if we could. A church in Leicestershire that has got, I won't say exactly where, but a church in Leicestershire that's got a new vicar has decided that for its annual Remembrance Day service, which has been going on in that church for over a century, that one of the fixtures of that service has always been the hymn, Onward, Christian Soldiers. You all know it. You've all sung it, I guess, at some point in your life out there, or most of you will. The vicar has decided that he's going to drop that particular hymn for fear that it might cause offence to non-Christians. Well, I tell you what, mate, just sell the church off, turn it into a local hotel, and give up on the Church of England completely. I can't see the point of being a vicar in the Church of England unless you believe in Christianity and believe in your message, whilst tolerating all other forms of religion and different people. But this kind of aggressive secularism that is moving through our country, that is intimidating young vicars like this, and frankly, he ought to stand firm. Other religions do, in defence of what they believe in. Back to this issue. Is the EU, through its money and its Monet professorships and everything else, twisting our universities into being places that are not teaching young people genuine critical analysis, that there are two sides to an argument and they ought to make their own minds up? Jordan is calling me from Brixton. Jordan, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Nigel. I think it's an interesting point that you make, because as a Remain voter, I sort of see the situation as the facts are that 52% of the voting population did vote for Brexit.
Yep.
So I don't agree with the idea that it's possible that 52% of the voting population could make their mind up purely based on ignorance and misinformation. So you've got to sort of recognize the fact that there is a shared sort of political argument or ideology there that we then, as a democratic society, have we have to explore unbiasedly. So I think it's ironic that universities can play the sort of censorship card when questioned about the way they're teaching these topics that have, a bit of political relevance, today. And if it's true that they're creating an atmosphere where some students can't confidently express their views that might be anti-Europe, then, it sort of draws parallels to, sort of North Korean education, where they teach a political rhetoric about the supreme leader at the same time they teach their students. It doesn't really fit British ideals in the way that.
So Jordan, do you suspect something is wrong with the universities on this?
Oh yeah, definitely. But I think it's endemic of a society where money buys political influence. Anyway, we see it through every level of society.
Yep.
So the fact that the EU are playing the exact same game, they're playing the game that we taught them to play.
Well, they're playing it very well, Jordan, because they seem to have bought off virtually every Vice-Chancellor in the country. No, Jordan, listen, as a Remain voter, you've given a very even-handed approach to that. It's a very, very good phone call. And I have to say that one of the benefits of Brexit is that our universities will not be receiving any money from the European Union. We can close down the Jean Monnet scholarships, and we can make sure, I hope, that our universities get back to that great global tradition that they had. We're supposed to have some of the greatest universities in the world, but they can't be great if they're not prepared to give one side of an argument an even hand. Jordan, great call there from Brixton. Barbara says, trying to brainwash students into voting one way is not only abuse of the lecturer's position, it's also interfering with the electoral process. If universities have been doing this, perhaps consideration needs to be given to raising the voting age to protect students from being used in this way. Wow, Barbara, that's radical, because all around me there are people saying we should reduce the voting age to 16, or is it 14, or I can't remember. But they're all talking about reducing the voting age. Your point is a very interesting one. I think it'll probably have a few people listening to this programme screaming at the radio, but nonetheless, we've made it. Marion is calling me from Finchley. Marion, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Pleasure to talk to you. I'm a Brexiteer, so is my husband. He's an immigrant, and we both have studied what the European Union's been doing for decades. We certainly didn't vote on June the 23rd out of ignorance. I'm looking forward to Independence Day being declared as soon as possible on June the 23rd, and a bank holiday maybe. Anyway, my point is universities, of course, should be absolutely neutral in the way they present ideas so that students make up their own minds. But the people who've been ringing who are saying that students are not impressionable, they will make up their own minds, have they looked back at the 1930s when Philby, Maclean, Burgess, Anthony Blunt, later Sir Anthony Blunt, were all recruited at Cambridge, and many others that we will never know about? And the lecturers were totally committed KGB agents, and they recruited these young men who most certainly came from educated, privileged backgrounds, and they were all recruited to be KGB agents.
Marion, they were. It's a long time ago, but they were. I wouldn't wish to draw any direct parallels between then and now. But listen, the point you make is an interesting one, that actually not all, but many young people are pretty impressionable. Thank you, Marion. As for Independence Day, who knows? Perhaps the Catalans will beat us to it. Who's to say? Given the time our government is taking with the Brexit process. And I've got time for one last caller this morning, and it's Tony, who's calling from Wimbledon. Good morning, Tony.
Hey, Nigel.
Good morning. So what do you think? Am I right to assert that the universities are not being even-handed in teaching our young people that on Brexit there are two very clear points of view, and that the individual should make their own minds up?
I think asking the individual to make their minds up is absolutely the right thing to do. I think where I have an issue is when you make that assertion, because is that based on fact? I mean, can I ask you, do you have information that says, not anecdotal, do you have...
Yes, Tony, I have 21 Vice-Chancellors coming out without even referring to their boards and saying, vote Remain. I have the fact that the EUs are not just funded by the European Union, but they've set up Jean Monnet chairs throughout British universities. Yes, Tony, it is based on fact. Tony, I thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. It is based on fact, and yeah, sure, I'm sure there are some universities where there's an even-handed approach, but I thought the approach of Tom Brake, the Liberal Democrat MP and Brexit spokesman, said it's fair for universities to be negative about Brexit because of the economics. For me, frankly, said it all. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC.